channels and our Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship page on our website at mndnr.gov/discover. I think with that, it looks like Cassie's starting the recording, and we will kick off today. My name is Benji Cohen with Minnesota DNR. I'd like to welcome our guest, Tim. He's the former president of the Minnesota Mycological Society and an avid forager. He's going to talk to us about foraging today. And for those of you that remember, not too long ago, we did a program on extreme ice adventures with the caveat that these are things that we just want to introduce people to briefly and go out there and experience, find somebody to find this experience with. This is not a classroom setting. This isn't going to give you enough knowledge to go out there and find mushrooms on your own, but we are going to give you lots of resources to kind of learn some tips and tricks on how to identify stuff, and lots of resources to go to when mushrooms are popping up in Minnesota and be able to go out with a trained person to learn a little bit more about that. So I think with that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Benji. And it's a pleasure to spend this day with everybody. Is this showing up? All right. Welcome to Wild Mushrooms. This is an introduction, like Benji said. The information in this presentation will not be sufficient for you to then go harvest wild mushrooms safely, but it is a great starting off point and a great way to develop working knowledge. And this basket on the right here, that's just one example of what your basket can look like in July or August in Minnesota. A bunch of delicious mushrooms in there. A little bit about me. So my name is Tim Clemens, and I was born and raised in Minneapolis. I didn't really involve myself too much with nature. I was very much a city kid until my early 20s. And that's when I started foraging. And foraging really made me care about nature and see it in an entirely different way. So since then, I've become the founder of Ironwood Foraging Company. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I am the past president, as Benji said, of the Minnesota Mycological Society, and I'll talk about that too. I'm a certified mushroom expert with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I have a certificate in nature education. I'm a Minnesota Master Naturalist, which, if anybody listening is a Minnesota Master Gardener, this is kind of like the wildlife, wild plants version of that. So join us, it's a great group. And I'm also a consulting mycologist at Minnesota Poison Control, and we also cover North Dakota and South Dakota. Okay, Ironwood Foraging. I founded this project in 2017 to offer hands-on experiences to people because it's my belief that connecting in personal and real ways, especially through food, for instance, with plants and mushrooms, is a great way to build stewardship. When you care about something specific, you're more likely to protect it. And then you can find my social media there. And these are some pictures, examples of what we do. The Minnesota Mycological Society has existed for 125 years. It was founded 125 years ago by Dr. Mary Snoddy Whetstone. She was a physician and botanist in the mid to late 1800s. And she actually founded Abbott Northwestern Hospital here. And that led her to found the Minnesota Mycological Society because she believed that mushrooms were a part of a nutritious, balanced diet, and along with rest and cleanliness, her patients would recover better. You can find them at minnesotamycologicalsociety.org, and this is an example of a very cold mushroom foray. So you can forage for mushrooms even when it's really cold out. Additionally, the MMS meetings are open to the public and complete beginners are welcome. It sounds really official and sciencey, but anybody can show up, okay? And then come hang out at this Minnesota State Fair. We have an award-winning display every year in the Agriculture Horticulture building, and we do talks on the dirt stage, which is very aptly named. So come check us out. Okay, so you're here because you want to learn about mushrooms in Minnesota. Well, first we have to ask ourselves, what is a mushroom? And mushrooms are the spore-bearing, fruiting body of fungal mycelium. What does that mean? If we look at this diagram on the right, let's start at the top and look at that mushroom that's labeled fruiting body. So mushrooms are slightly analogous to fruit or even flowers because they produce spores, which are kind of like seeds or pollen, but very different from both of those. So you have your mushroom, and the spores mature inside of that and then are released either into the wind or by pollinators. Yes, mushrooms have pollinators too. Those spores will then land somewhere, and if it's to their liking, they will germinate. When a spore germinates, it creates a little kind of hollow tube that's very stringy called a hyphae. And then a bunch of hyphae put together are called a mycelium. And then the circle continues. You can kind of think like of mycelium and mushrooms as an apple on an apple tree. Although in this case, the apple tree is almost entirely out of view and you almost never see it. It'd be like just finding apples coming out of a log or coming out of the dirt, which would be really weird. But it's kind of what mushrooms are doing. I want to introduce two terms that I'll talk about a little bit later, saprotrophic and mycorrhizal. Those are the two main divisions of how mushrooms eat, basically, and how they get their energy. And just keep in mind that if I'm going a little bit too fast for you, you will be able to watch this again. So don't be too worried about keeping up. I do want to point out that mushrooms can be edible, they can be medicinal, but most importantly, they can be sometimes deadly. So there are deadly mushrooms, and I tell you that not to inspire fear, but because fear is mostly of the unknown. Once you know something, then it's more like respect and caution, and that's how we want to approach our the beginning of our mushroom hunting journey. Just knowing that some of them can hurt us very bad. Okay, so there are between 1.5 million and 13 million species of fungi. Now, all of those are not mushroom producing fungi. Probably only about, when all is said and done, maybe about 140,000 to 200,000 will be once science gets there. And I say that because we have actually not described over 90% of fungal species on the planet. So if you're interested at all in getting to the edge of human understanding in a field, this is a really quick way to do that. And we need more people researching this and studying it. If you want to know what mycelium looks like, kind of in the real world, that top right picture of that stringy, cobwebby like thing, that's mycelium. So if you're out in the garden or in the woods and you knock aside some wood chips or some leaves and you see that, you've likely found some mycelium. And then here's an example of a mushroom. This is Amanita muscaria, or the fly agaric. Now, I have that red X on that picture because this mushroom is toxic. That doesn't mean the pictures that don't have it are edible or are completely safe to eat. This is just letting you know, like as a second level, that this is a dangerous mushroom. But you might recognize that bottom right mushroom, that cluster of mushrooms there, that is oyster mushrooms. Those are really commonly cultivated these days. You probably see them in the store. Um, but they do have lookalikes, and every mushroom has a lookalike. Plants have lookalikes. People have lookalikes. I'm an identical twin. I would know. So just be careful when you're identifying things out there. And we want to think about, just in a big picture, how are mushrooms related to everything else? And I really like these two graphs. So if we look, if you can see my pointer here, on the left graph, we look in this brown part called eukaryota, and we see animals and fungi, and they're right next to each other. Um, and then we have plants, okay? Um, Animals and fungi are most closely related to each other, and we're actually more closely related to each other than either of us is to plants. So we'll kind of transition over to this graph and look at the bottom right. You'll see this word, maybe you can barely make it out, but it's opisthokonta. And that is actually the group of all animals and all fungi. We make a group called the opisthokonts. And just as a fun fact, you see this green area called eukaryotes? Essentially everything you've ever seen with your naked eye without a microscope is in that group. And the rest of the planet of life is everything else. So aliens would be forgiven if they came to this planet and thought it was a bacterial planet and just thought we were a weird kind of sideshow. So anyway, who needs ancestry.com? Okay, So those words I mentioned earlier, saprotrophic and mycorrhizal. Let's break those down to see what they mean. So saprotrophic, sapro, rotten, trophic, eater. So that's basically your decomposers in a general sense. And then mycorrhizal is myco, which means fungi, rhizal, which means root. So that means just fungi in their relationship with roots, which is a symbiotic relationship. We can see that illustrated here on this picture. You see the red webbing going between these two different species of trees in their root systems, the Norway spruce and the European beech. Well, that is a mycorrhizal relationship. And what happens there is the mushroom interacts with the tree's root system and it takes a little bit of sugar from the tree. The tree is happy to do this because in return it gets a lot more access to water and trace minerals. And then if we look at this little yellow this little yellow figure right here, that's your decomposer. So this guy is, eating leaves, eating pine needles, maybe some manure in the dirt, and they can also grow on logs or on trees. Very cool. So if you are looking for a mushroom, an edible mushroom, for instance, um, that is supposed to be a saprotroph, you're only going to find it where it can eat something. And if you're looking for a mycorrhizal species, you're only going to find it in, near its preferred buddies or tree buddies, maybe an oak or a pine or something like that. And be mindful that those associations can change when you leave the region that you've learned about. So if you've learned about Minnesota mushrooms, it's going to change in Wisconsin. It's definitely going to change in Pennsylvania, California, and wherever. So real quick, I want to talk about the types of mushrooms. Now, what this means is this is just generally the forms that mushrooms can take. And this doesn't cover all of them because there are many, and there are some asterisks involved. But basically, I want you to know in general what you're looking at. And you can even do this in the produce section the next time you go. See if you can find some of these groups in your produce section. But we're going to talk about agarics, boletes, toothed mushrooms or hydnoid mushrooms, polypores, and then others. So first we have the agarics. Essentially, what an agaric means is you have a stem with a distinct cap and gills or lamellae. Now, what gills mean, if we go to this blue mushroom on the right here, gills are those little lines that are coming out of the stem or going towards the stem from the rim of the cap of the mushroom. Now, we can't touch these, but if you do find a mushroom and it has these gills, touch it. And you will see it's kind of like paging through a book. It's like little pages almost. Those are gills. And so calling a mushroom an agaric mushroom is telling you nothing more than that it has a stem, it has a distinct cap, and it has gills. It doesn't tell you edibility, it doesn't tell you what species they are. But I just want you to know what you're looking at. And then there's also some biology here, like a ring or a vulva. These are other characteristics among many that you have to look at. So here are some more agarics, just to give you some variety. This is a Gymnopolis luteus. Notice, its gills look slightly different. It's a different color. And then we have in the middle here, that's a wood bluet or Colibia nuda. This is beautiful lilac mushroom that grows in oftentimes pine duff or leaf litter. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Looks different, has lookalikes. So again, start your research. This is not the end. And then look at this massive mushroom. This is a really cool outlier of the oyster mushroom genus. This is Pleurotus dryanus. It's growing out of a fallen aspen tree. And notice its gills are actually starting to descend the stem a little bit. That's called subdecurrent or decurrent. So there's words to describe what our gills doing in relation to the stem on a specific mushroom. All right, our second one is boletes. This is our second type of mushroom. Boletes do look like agarics, but with one really important difference. Instead of gills, in addition to their stem and their cap, they have this kind of spongy tube layer. You can be forgiven for walking in the woods and at the beginning of your mushroom hunting journey, and you're like, oh, that's a mushroom I've seen before. That's an agaric mushroom and this genus and this species. And then you go down and you touch it and you look underneath it, and you're surprised, oh wow, that's a bolete. Very interesting. And so then you're going to start looking it up from there. Here are some more boletes that you'll find in Minnesota. This is the scabrous stock or Lexinum species. By the way, these science names I'm saying, or the binomials, you actually don't really need to know those, or at least how to pronounce them. Um, Everyone pronounces them differently. It's the most safe to know those names. Common names can be helpful, but you do want to know those names, but it doesn't matter how you pronounce them. Like for instance, this one, Exudoporus frostii. I don't know if other people pronounce it like that, but they know what I mean, and that's what's important. So don't get a complex about it, and just speak with confidence, and you'll be good. This middle red bolete, frost bolete, is actually called the candy apple bolete as well, because it smells like candied apples. It is one of the most delicious smelling mushrooms out there. And then on the right, we have the porcini or king bolete. That's probably the most sought after bolete mushroom, of which we have several different species in Minnesota. Very cool. Okay, if you are interested in boletes, I do want to suggest a book. This is Boletes of Eastern North America, and that's probably the best bolete book that's out right now. Um, if we look at this picture on the right, this is that frost bolete again, but it's cut in half. And so we can actually see some blue staining. So staining is an important diagnostic feature of mushroom identification, especially in boletes, because they can turn red and then blood red or brown, or they can start blue and turn brown. You get what I'm saying? So you are just going to have to go down a checklist and just pay a lot of attention to what you're trying to identify, because there can be very small differences. And then if you're lucky, you can find these little droplets of mushroom metabolites, we'll call it, called guttation. Uh, those are just cool. I don't know, it's very cool looking. Our next group of mushrooms is called the toothed mushrooms, or the hydnoid mushrooms, which means toothed. This mushroom on the left, this like kind of white little critter, that's lion's mane. And that's really popular right now. You can find it in stores. It's commonly cultivated. You can make crab cakes out of it. Um, but when you find this in the wild, it'll be growing on logs or trees, and it looks like someone stuck just a little furry pom-pom to a tree. And it has these little teeth hanging down. We can almost think of them as stalactites in a cave hanging down from the ceiling. They're very interesting, and that's where its spores mature. If we look at the right here, that's a hedgehog mushroom. It's another toothed fungus, but it looks very different. The only thing it has in common with the lion's mane is these little teeth structures where its spores come from. Otherwise, it has a cap and a stem. And this one's edible. They don't get quite this big in Minnesota. I found that one in Oregon. So mushroom hunting can also make your traveling a lot more fun. Okay, polypores. Polypores, that just means poly, many, pores means pores. So it's like on your skin. You have little holes called pores. That's what's going on here. So if you look on the underside of these mushrooms, they release their spores from little pores. Their stems and caps are typically not distinct from each other. So it'll all be essentially one piece. Although they might have a rudimentary stem, chicken of the woods sometimes does. Um, yeah, chicken of the woods is a widely eaten mushroom. Um, it does have lookalikes. Oftentimes people will say it's not one that has lookalikes, but it does. There's specifically one called Hapalopolis croceus, but there are others. So even with a quote unquote safe or beginner mushroom, always know that there could be information you don't know that you don't know. So just be safe and make sure you have and triple check your identification. And this is the bottom of chicken of the woods. So that's a look at those pores. You might have to squint a little bit. There is a white pored chicken of the woods that is a different color in Minnesota. Okay. Um, the other group, we kind of lump other, a wide array of mushrooms into this other group. Like truffles would be in here. We got the puffball on the right, on the left here. That's the spiny puffball. Um, on the right here, we have the morel. That's the Minnesota state mushroom. And it gets a little, instead of a red X, it gets a little yellow bar because for caution. Morels, a lot of people don't know this, but they're actually a toxic mushroom that is made edible by cooking thoroughly. You have to cook them thoroughly. You cannot eat a morel raw. Unfortunately, two people did pass away in Montana last year from eating raw um, morels. They were at a restaurant, and the restaurant put the morels in there in a sauce raw without cooking them, and it sickened dozens of people. And unfortunately, two people did pass away. So you want to cook your mushrooms. You know, you can't make deadly mushrooms edible by cooking, specifically like amatoxin mushrooms, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But even like your classic edible mushrooms, you just want to be careful and cook those thoroughly. But you might be wondering, why is the morel in the other category? It has a stem and a cap, but then if you look for gills or a spongy tube layer or pores or teeth, you're not seeing any of those. So wait, where does the morel release its spores from? It actually releases them from these pits or asci. And if you hold a morel up to the sunlight, oftentimes you can see little geysers of spores shooting out into like the sunbeams. It's beautiful and it's very magical. So here are some more other mushrooms. That's me holding a giant puffball mushroom. These might appear in your yard and you think maybe the neighbor kicked over a soccer ball or something like that. But nope, it's a fungi, it's a mushroom, and it's a giant puffball. Now these are safe to eat, but when puffballs get small, I would say anything even smaller than a softball, you want to make sure that you don't have a lookalike. So some mushrooms, including some of the deadliest mushrooms, start as an egg shape. And that's what's called a universal veil. So the mushroom is all wrapped up in tissue, and so it looks like a white little ball, and then it'll eventually grow up and break out of that tissue to be the mushroom that we see. But the small puffballs can look like those eggs. Okay, so cut them in half. Always cut your puffballs in half, and make sure there's not an outline of a mushroom in there. Um, Otherwise, if you're 100% sure that you have a puffball, you also have to make sure that they're completely pure white inside and haven't started turning yellow or olive green or brown or purple, because that means their spores have started to mature and they're no longer appropriate to eat. In the middle here, we have the lobster fungus. Now, this is widespread in Minnesota. I find the biggest ones and the most prolific fruitings of them up north. Right? So if you're up in Grand Marais or Duluth or something, that's lobster mushroom central in my experience. But that's actually a fungus that has parasitized another mushroom and totally taken over its DNA and totally changed um, the fruiting body. So it'll turn this orangish red, it'll become very dense and a little bit hard, and it'll smell a little bit like fish. And that's nothing like the original host mushroom is. On the right here, that is the wood ear. So if you think the trees are listening to you, they are. Newsflash. This has like a kind of a crunchy, soft, cartilaginous texture that's really nice in soups. And since it's Charles Darwin's birthday month, he was born in 1809 on February 12th. I just love this quote by him. From so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and wonderful have been and are being evolved. I think that applies to the mushroom world amazingly. Okay, I want to focus on deadly mushrooms now. There are several species in Minnesota that are deadly, and this is one of them on the left. This is deadly Galerina or Galerina marginata. On the right, though, we have wild enoki or Flammulina veludipes. Now, they look similar, especially to a beginner, but the one on the left is deadly, the one on the right is edible. And I'm sure people have made this mistake, unfortunately. Deadly Galerina contains amatoxin, and amatoxin is one of the deadliest fungal mycotoxins. If you do eat it, your liver and kidneys try to process it, and it destroys them. So it is very serious. Um, and these can actually be grown. These both grow on wood, and they can actually be growing next to each other. I assume even touching each other. I have found deadly Galerina growing on a log next to a mushroom species called the late oyster or Sarcomyxa serotina, and it has been physically touching the edible late oyster. So there's nothing saying that fungi don't, there's nothing telling them where they can and can't grow typically if the conditions are right, right? So we just really want to be careful. You cannot cook out amatoxin. You cannot dry it. You cannot boil it. It cannot be made edible by any sort of cooking. Here's some more deadly mushrooms. So this mushroom on the left is actually named after the Minnesota Mycological Society founder, Dr. Mary Whetstone. So this is Amanita whetstoniae. That's very cool. That is toxic to your kidneys. And then in the middle here, this is Amanita bisporigera, the destroying angel. That contains amatoxin. It's regarded as the most toxic mushroom in the United States, and it's actually fairly common in Minnesota. And then on the right here, I know we saw Amanita muscaria before, but in Minnesota, ours is yellow. So we call that variation Gassalii, but its name might be changing due to some taxonomical changes through DNA and some papers being published. So it might be called Amanita chrysoblema now. Don't worry, as long as you have the internet, you can find new names and old names interchangeably, and it'll be okay. But yeah, oh, there's a hand raised. Yeah, Amanita muscaria, that's growing in late summer or fall, and it's extremely plentiful. So that is toxic without proper preparation. We won't go into that today, but just treat it like a toxic mushroom. How to begin? So I always suggest meeting with experts. My degree is in anthropology, so culture and human-to-human contact is really important to me. And I think it's just the best way to learn as well. So find someone who's knowledgeable that you can verify that they have knowledge. Ironwood Foraging Company or the Minnesota Mycological Society are really good. If you're up in Duluth, check out Ariel's Mushroom Company. That's Ariel Bonkoski up there. She's super knowledgeable. If you're in the St. Cloud or Monticello region, check out Matt Mosher from Matt's Mushrooms and More. Um, as far as books, you're going to want to check out something that's regional and specific. Mostly we get by on books that are written for the upper Midwest or the Midwest. So I suggest Mushrooms of the Midwest here by Michael Kuo and Andrew Methvin. Michael Kuo also runs a website called mushroomexpert.com, which is a really good resource. For books and for websites, we do need to be careful right now because there's a rise of AI that is making fake books and fake website articles. So it can be really dangerous, especially if you don't know enough to know that you're reading something that's fake. On Amazon right now, which is where most people get their books, of the top 60 foraging books that are available right now, 48 of them are completely fake books. That is pretty scary. And it's not only dangerous for us, it's also affecting the authors that we depend on otherwise for good information. So from the authors that I know, their sales have gone down 80%. So that's really bad. But good websites, I mentioned Mushroom Expert, but also check out foragerchef.com. That's Alan Burgo. He's from St. Paul. And, if you want to cook with mushrooms or even plants, his recipes are fine dining level quality while still being very accessible. Like, I don't really know how to cook, and his recipes always turn out great for me. So if I can do it, you guys can definitely do it. Okay, and then finally, experience. You will never learn how to mushroom hunt from just reading or just watching videos or just looking at websites. You got to get out there. Now, all mushrooms are safe to touch, but not all mushrooms are safe to eat. We know some are deadly. So, but it's not like plants. Poison ivy, if you touch it, you get a rash, or stinging nettle, it'll kind of give you like an itching, burning sensation. You can touch mushrooms. That doesn't mean to say that you can't have a unique, individual allergy to something that you're touching. Um, you know, Bananas are edible for most people, but some people can't eat them. Same with shellfish and other things. So, yeah, I mean, maybe don't rub the mushroom on your face the first time, and then we'll do fine. As far as apps, everyone seems to have their favorite app that they learn from. I just want to say that you should get iNaturalist. It's, in my experience, it's free. So if you're paying for like a plant identification app or a mushroom identification app, no shade on them, but I would get this free one because it's not only AI and an algorithm, it's also people. So there's a human community on there that you can interact with, and it has a ton of other features that I can't even list here because we don't have enough time that just make it so good, especially if you travel. What to bring when you're going out mushroom hunting? Um, First of all, the biggest danger is falling. So bring your awareness. Bring your be in your body. Don't be just in your mind. I know it's exciting to be looking for mushrooms, but you need to watch where you're going first and then look for mushrooms. Okay. But second is there's a lot of tick-borne illnesses, and they're on the rise right now. So you need to protect yourself. And for that, you're going to need picaridin or permethrin. Both of these are available at, your Menards, Home Depot, etc. Picaridin is typically in a red bug spray can, and then permethrin is typically like in a yellow can. Use those as directed. Also bring water, closed-toed shoes, long pants. So that's not just for thorns and such. It's also so that you can tuck them into your socks. And then if ticks get on you, then they have to crawl up your body, and you have a better chance of picking them off before they can bite you. Also bring a friend. We love the buddy system when we're out in nature. Just make sure it's someone you can trust to not go back to your super secret mushroom spot without you. This totally ruins friendships and relationships and even marriages. So just make sure you can trust them. Bring a mushroom hunting knife for harvesting, a brush in case you have sand or dirt on your mushrooms, a basket. Kind of the wider and shallower the better. You don't really want too much depth because then your mushrooms will crush each other. But at the end of the day, a cloth bag will also work too. Just don't use plastic because your mushrooms are going to sweat and degrade in the plastic bag, and then you're going to have kind of a mush in your bag when you get home. Bring a whistle in case something happens to you. So say you do fall or something happens, you can whistle a lot longer with a whistle than you can yell. That gets exhausting pretty quick, and people typically know to go to the source of a whistle and see if they can help you. Then wax paper bags are good if you find different species that you don't know what they are. And if you're a beginner, that's going to be pretty much everything. So you want to keep them separate from each other so that you can identify them later. And if you do know some mushrooms, just enough to harvest your edible ones, and you have a basket full of, say, morels or chanterelles or something like that, and you find a mushroom that you don't really know, you're going to want to put that unknown mushroom in that bag to keep it separate from your edible mushrooms, because you don't want it breaking up or contaminating your edible mushrooms, because what if it's a deadly mushroom or just a toxic mushroom? And then you're going to want to bring a camera or phone and a field guide. So even if you don't want to eat mushrooms, it is an amazing hobby to just see how beautiful they are and photograph them and paint them. Um, and a phone will also help you ID things, at least in part. Okay, the legality of mushroom hunting. You cannot mushroom hunt legally everywhere. You can do it on private land as long as you know the person. It's a great way to make friends. But where it's allowed is state parks, state forests, national parks, some. So you can't go to Yellowstone and mushroom hunt. So not all national parks are the same. National forests and wildlife management areas, or WMAs. Places that it's illegal are scientific and natural areas, or SNAs. Ramsey County parks, basically all county parks and municipal parks, in my experience, it's not allowed. But when in doubt, just call ahead. And we also want to make sure that when we're out mushroom hunting, we're not trampling plants unnecessarily. There's a better way to walk that I do show people how to do. You kind of like shake your foot in a certain way. We're just not trying to step on plants. So say if you see a chicken of the woods deep in the forest, you don't have to go in a straight line towards it. You can actually work with the plants and kind of go on their terrain and step around them, step around the baby trees and such. To get there. And you'll probably see more cool stuff meandering along the way rather than going in a straight line, right? So we want to think about our plant and mushroom relatives. Just as an aside, if you do think mushroom hunting is important, I do strongly suggest that at maybe a caucus as a resolution, or contacting your representatives, your elected representatives, and tell them just, hey, I really value mushroom hunting as a land use. What can we do to better facilitate that and manage for that? Okay, this is the question that you're going to ask yourself a bunch. Can I eat this mushroom? And it needs to satisfy these three criteria. Has it been identified? And you got to be completely sure, not just one source. At minimum, three that are trustworthy. They all have to say the same thing, okay? So has it been identified? Is it in prime condition? Just because you found a chicken of the woods doesn't mean you can eat it, because maybe it's all hard and chalky or it's starting to mold or something like that. It's got to be in prime condition, just like anything you'd get from the store or farmer's market. And then, has it been prepared correctly? So you've identified it, it's in prime condition. Now you need to prepare it correctly. Do you need to cook it thoroughly? Is there in a very essential boiling stage that you have to do before that? Just make sure you're doing it right. So quick review, let's review some concepts. What are mushrooms? They're the fruit of mycelium, and they range from edible to deadly, and only 10% of fungal species have been described by science so far. Types of mushrooms that you may see, although you may see others, are agarics, boletes, toothed mushrooms, polypores, or other, like your puffballs or morels. And then how to begin, experts, books, websites, and experience, and then iNaturalist, we'd add to that. And then what to bring, tick prevention, appropriate clothing for the weather and conditions, water, tools for identification, and tools for harvesting. Legality, again, it's not legal everywhere, so you want to stick to state parks and state forests, national parks that allow it, national forests, and wildlife management areas. And that's, by the way, only for personal use. You cannot sell from mushrooms from public land, nor would we really want to. And then eating mushrooms. So identify them first, prepare them appropriately. Also, eat only a small amount, because you could be allergic to this mushroom and there's no way to know until you eat it. So just eat a little bit. You can always eat more. You can never eat less. And if you are allergic, you're going to wish you ate less. Okay. And then when in doubt, throw it out or just do more research. Okay. Thank you so much. We're going to open it up to questions now.
Great. Tim, this is the second time I've listened to the presentation. It's fascinating. So great job.
Oh, thank you, Benji.
Super cool. Mushrooms are fascinating to me, and you did a great job sharing way more than I ever knew about mushrooms. So thank you for that. A couple things I picked up, the stewardship, we talked about this earlier. Just be careful when you're out there, especially in these public lands. A lot of people are using public lands. So if everybody decides to go to a place and you share your secret spot with 100 other people, it destroys it for everybody in the future. So you mentioned both respect and cautious when you're out there looking for mushrooms and just in the environment in general. I think that's two words that we need to pay attention to and use every day when we're out there. So respect and caution. So care for the land and the animals, and this is for personal use. So take only stuff that you're going to need and do that. So great job. We got a ton of questions coming in. We had a big audience today, so let's see if we can get through a few of these. I do want to point out there's a few people it seemed like that had some kind of audio or video issues in there. These are recorded. Once again, visit our website at mndnr.gov/discover to find those recordings, or go to our Minnesota DNR YouTube channel and look for them there too. Those will probably put up. I'll try to get them up tonight, so you guys can check in on those. Beth had a question about, and there was another one in here too, about cross-contamination of mushrooms. Can a mushroom hurt you if you touch it? And if it's a harmful mushroom? And another one was asking about, if you use a brush to clean off your mushroom or a knife to cut it, can you cross-contaminate a bad mushroom and a good mushroom?
That's a really good question. Even the deadliest mushrooms are safe to touch. Again, we don't want to eat them. And that's why it's really important to keep your mushrooms separate in waxed paper bags. So that, treat them like anything, like you would treat chicken or something like that. Just follow basic, cross-contamination prevention methods, and yeah, you should be fine. Cutting a mushroom with a knife, I personally always wipe my knife in between, but I mean, technically, they're kind of dose dependent, so you're not going to reach the dangerous dosage with just the debris left on a knife after cutting a deadly one.
Okay, great. And if you want, you can stop your presentation. We did put most
yeah.
of those links in the Q&A, or not the Q&A, excuse me, the chat function. So if you want to open that up while we're asking questions and click on those so you can save some of those links for later, I would highly recommend that. So Andrea asked, and I think we answered this, a reliable app for IDing mushrooms. iNaturalist is
Yeah,
most likely.
no app is appropriate to eat from, but it's a really good starting point, and I would suggest iNaturalist.
Great. Jesse, one of the favorite mushrooms, my kids are mountain bikers. We love to mountain bike, and they get so excited when you find puffball mushrooms, even though my kids won't eat them, but they like to see them. So he was wondering, could you use the outside of a puffball even if the inside is colored?
No, you don't want to, at least for eating. You can use the outside of a puffball for as a bandage, but like the actual like kind of slightly leathery skin. But no, you don't want to eat any part of the puffball if any part of it started changing color. Just trust that you will have an opportunity to find and eat a completely prime condition one in the future. You don't have to eat this one right now.
Great. Dana's got a really good question here. Thanks for the presentation. She said she's also an MMS member, total amateur. She said, when in your journey did you feel confident enough to ID in your IDing to eat mushrooms you foraged?
I would say the first year, but it's all about starting slow and it's all about the experiences you have. So if you're around a bunch of very knowledgeable people that can impart their knowledge and experience to you effectively, then you're going to be going pretty quick compared to someone who's trying to learn by themselves and just from books and is fearful that they're getting it wrong. So, my first mushroom that I harvested and ate was the shaggy mane or Caprinus comatus. And I was a little bit worried the first time because I was like, do I have the right thing? Can I actually be doing this right now? Like, I mean, I had just no precedent in my life for that. But I was sure of my identification. I ran it by other people and it turned out well. So,
Great. Elizabeth was asking what the Duluth area expert's name. I think you gave somebody up there. If you give that
Ariel,
name again.
yeah, Ariel, like the mermaid, Ariel Bonkoski. And that's Ariel's Mushroom Company.
Great. I know up in Tetigooch, also Kurt Mead is a pretty active forager up there, one of the naturalists. He's actually done a moss program for us before on foraging. So you
Oh,
want to
so
check
cool.
that out, Elizabeth. More iNaturalist stuff. Pro tip, Jenna, and this is we always mention, books and Amazon and ordering it, but a lot of people forget about the local library. A lot of local libraries have foraging books, including the Forager Chef's new book that's out. So thank you, Janaea, for putting that out. Um, when we had one on morels, is there a false, well, I think it's called a false morel, and a lookalike morel mushroom?
Yeah, the concept of lookalikes is more about your experience level and what you're kind of perceiving more so than what the actuality of the mushrooms are. So there are several mushrooms called false morels, and some of them really don't look anything like morels, but to someone who doesn't know, I mean, you just don't know, right? Um, there are some called the Verpa, or they used to be called spring morels or early morels that are actually in the morel family. They're in the Morchellaceae. And those are actually edible with the same preparation as morels. However, you have like the false morel, which I think is a more popular species that name refers to, is the Gyromitra esculenta. And that is potentially deadly toxic if you don't prepare it correctly. So it's eaten widely in Europe, and it is eaten sometimes here in very initiated cultures. But yeah, you're just going to want to make sure of your identification. And if you ever think you have a false morel, reach out to somebody. I mean, send me a message, send the Mycological Society a message or an email or something like that. You don't have to do this alone. Never think that you have to go like you have to take a leap of faith. That's never the energy you should be bringing to eating a mushroom. You can always reach out to somebody.
Awesome. And I just thought of something like when you were saying all these scientific names, our captioner out there, I'm sure, is doing a fantastic job, but we might want to go back and have you look over some of our captions on how to spell all these things you're talking about. So, Megan, Megan brought up a good point too. Invasive species prevention. What can a forager do to kind of limit the spread of invasive species from cleaning boots, cleaning tools, knowing what invasive species are? Do you want to talk about that real briefly?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. Clean your boots, clean your tools. Unfortunately, with invasive species of fungi, humans are not at the technological level that we are able to really stifle the efforts of fungi. They are at least for now, a higher technology than us. So we have the golden oyster in Minnesota, is a non-native oyster species that's spreading. Um, in terms of plants, if you're interested in plants and not just mushrooms, I really suggest, learning about buckthorn, learning about garlic mustard and how they spread and how you can join an invasive species removal group. There's they're all over the place and they're desperate for volunteers. So I help with at least two of them. Um, and that's a great way to just get familiarity with the land and plants, and you'll see some mushrooms while you're doing it too.
Awesome. Great answer. Amber, hi, Amber. In addition to people having certain allergies, I've also heard about certain mushrooms interacting badly with something like alcohol. Anything you can add to that aspect?
Yeah, for sure. There are mushrooms that interact badly with alcohol. So specifically, Caprinus atramentarius, I think is how you say it. That one is literally if you I mean, if you eat that and you've had alcohol hours before or hours after, you will become violently ill. It's actually the source of a medication was designed to prevent people from drinking alcohol. So I think multiple species can do that. I know that one can, and you just don't want to eat a lot of fiber or a mushroom that may be new to you on as while drinking, because even just drinking itself could give you an upset tummy. So
Oh, yeah. Great answers. Something I learn every day. I love it. Could you explain how to do a spore print?
yeah, that's actually a great question because I forgot to mention spore prints. That's one of the ID features that you're going to be looking at when IDing a mushroom. So you want to know what color the spores are, and they can be green, they can be purple, black, rust color, and it can be very specific too. Like, is this more of a brownish rust or is it more of like a orangish rust color? So it can be very specific. So what you want to do is you want to take the cap of your mushroom, or at least the fertile surface of your mushroom. You want to put that side down. You want to put it on either, I would recommend glass if you have it. Put it on glass, and then you can put like a white piece of paper underneath it or a black piece of paper underneath it, and that's how you can like see what color you're dealing with. Otherwise, you can put it on maybe a half a sheet of black paper, half a sheet of white paper, or tin foil or something like that, and you just leave it sit there for, let's say 4 hours or up to 8 hours overnight if you want to, and then go look at it and see what color it is. And that's just the basic idea there.
Great. Another thing I haven't tried yet, so all kinds of fun stuff. Um, Beyond books, how else do you suggest a person get confirmation of what we think we have found if we are alone? So we mentioned iNaturalist. Is there a phone a friend group?
Um, Probably make those friends before you go into the woods, maybe. Yeah, I mean, if you're finding a mushroom and you're thinking about whether to eat it, again, it's just you never want to be put in the position like, oh, I really want to eat this unidentified mushroom. So you got to identify it first, even if you find what you think is like the mother lode of chanterelles, okay? And you're like, oh man, well, I'm out here and I could harvest so much. I need to make sure. You're kind of putting yourself in a little bit of you know, a position where you might put a square peg in a round hole. Okay. So just know that those mushrooms are going to come back next year and the year after that, and probably every year for the rest of your life. So you don't have to do it right now. So, yeah, just make the friends before you go in the woods and be knowledgeable otherwise. Yeah.
Good idea. Mark was wondering, how do you think this lack of snow and warm winter temperatures will affect foraging for mushrooms this year?
I have absolutely no idea, and I don't think anybody knows, but everything that comes after this is just completely my own conjecture. Mushrooms love moisture, and trees love moisture. So I think if they have less moisture, there might be less mushrooms. There's every chance that in a localized area, you might not have a chanterelle season or like a bolete season, like a porcini season or something like that, just because the conditions aren't right. So, but never count yourself out. I mean, last year we didn't, it was really dry, right, in the summertime. And so I didn't think we were going to have a porcini season. We didn't really, it was like usually it happens in August or September. It wasn't until October that the porcini season actually came out, and it was the best anyone's ever seen in living memory. So, it's
Wow.
like that old proverb, maybe this is bad, but maybe it's good.
It's a good way to look at it. We'll wait and see, huh?
Yep.
Amos wanted to ask you a question about how about addressing not taking all the mushrooms in one spot and leaving some for reproduction?
Yeah, and that's the fundamental forager's ethic. No forager wants to not be able to forage anymore. So you're never taking all of something. You're never taking the only thing. Um, you don't want to just think about other people. A lot of people think about, oh, I want to leave these mushrooms for other people. Well, what about the slugs? What about the insects that eat mushrooms, etc.? So yeah, you should leave a few mushrooms behind. I will say though that the forager actually, cutting a mushroom or plucking a mushroom and then holding it up and then walking around with it in their bag, you're spreading those spores farther than that mushroom could ever have hoped to spread. I mean, 99% of a mushroom spores fall within 3 feet of the fruiting body. The fact that you're bringing it around to catch a wind current or, see new things and see the world, you're doing a lot of good for it. So.
It's an interesting idea.
Mhm.
John was wondering, Tim, what is your favorite mushroom, edible or inedible?
Like choosing my favorite child or pet or something like that. I'll just say one that I really like. I just love chanterelles. I named my cat. I have an orange cat. I named him Chanterelle Mushroom Clemens. Um, and so yeah, you could say I like chanterelles a lot. They smell like apricots. I love seeing them in oak forests in the summertime. Um, yeah, they're wonderful. They taste great.
Heather put a question here that's you might have some. You said I forget what your background was in
Anthropology.
anthropology. She said, what educational programs do you recommend for people who want to do more research on mushrooms?
Yeah, unfortunately, there aren't really any field mycology. So what we talked about today is field mycology, or you could call it amateur mycology or mushroom hunting. That isn't really, there's no programs for that in schools as far as I'm aware of. Um, what you will get in schools is plant pathology, typically, is where the mycology department is. I know at the University of Minnesota, we have, like, for instance, the Kennedy Lab, and they do tons of amazing work, but they're studying a lot of plant rusts and agriculture rusts and stuff like that. Um, I don't really know much about that stuff, and a lot of academically trained mycologists don't know a lot about field mycology. So we can all learn from each other. But otherwise, this is find experts, find groups to join up with, and go out and do things. That's the best way to learn.
Awesome. Um, Drew was wondering, any mushrooms that primarily grow from decaying animals?
Yeah, like cordyceps. And, if anybody is familiar with The Last of Us, that video game series, yeah, cordyceps will grow from ants, and I think Ophiocordyceps, correct me if I'm wrong, grows from cicadas. Um, as far as them feeding on actual people, there is a mushroom that can eat your face. It's called the split gill mushroom, Schizophyllum commune. So it's an edible mushroom that it hasn't happened many times. I think it's only happened like 8 times. But there's for people that have like a compromised immune system, this split gill fungus, which you'll find growing on wooden fences and stuff, um, it can, if its spores get up your nose and into your sinuses, which is a warm, wet, perfect area, it will actually germinate and create mycelium, and it'll eat your maxilla bone. So it'll eat your face, and then it can actually fruit inside of your face.
See, now everybody's going to have a new favorite mushroom.
Right, right.
Hopefully one we never encounter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I'm
Uh,
seeing all the
Bob
reactions
and
to it.
Bob and Ryan had real similar questions here about timing. What's the best time of year to go on foraging, or a preferred time of year to go look for mushrooms?
In the metro area of Minnesota, which is where I have the most experience, and your mileage is gonna vary with these time windows, but typically late April to mid-November, depending on the year, are gonna be your best times. But there are distinct mushroom seasons. Like the spring mushroom season is different than the summer. The summer is different from the late summer, and then there's typically a fall season. So they're all gonna have like each one of those is gonna have something for everybody.
Okay. I know because we originally talked about winter mushrooms, and there actually is some mushrooms you can harvest in the winter in Minnesota.
Yeah, totally. You have the winter mushroom, which is that look-alike for the deadly Galerina that I showed. It's the wild enoki or Flammulina veludipes. So that comes out in the wintertime, especially if we have thaws. We'll have some oyster mushroom species that comes out in thaws. And then so this is really common and popular, but chaga is actually not a mushroom. Chaga, which is used for tea, medicinally, or just for the taste, it tastes awesome. But it typically grows on birch trees, although some other species host chaga. Is this like big black growth on a tree, and it's a parasite, so it's killing the tree. But you can harvest that, but you cannot harvest that on public land, as far as I know, as of 2019, because it's not a mushroom; it's a
Interesting.
sterile conch or sclerotia.
Hmm. Lots of interesting stuff. Todd was wondering, do you believe it is possible for mushroom locations to produce multiple separate flushes in the same year? Talking about morel specifically, but he's curious about other mushrooms also.
I think it definitely is. Just in my own experience, I grow a native fungus called wine caps or Stropharia rugoso annulata. That's a mouthful. Um, but I grow that in my backyard, and it will flush 7 times across the year. You know, in the first week of June, all the way up to the last mushrooms are pushing up snow on their little caps. So, as
Huh,
far as morels, they're really localized to a spring season typically, although rarely you can get some really erratic fruitings from wood chips from certain species of morels.
great. I know we are just about out of time here. There is a ton of, there's still a lot of questions in here, so I apologize. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we have your contact information. We're more than happy to share that information with anybody. Had a great audience today. Thank you everybody for attending. Make sure to join us next week for our 153rd episode. We're going to be talking about the critical habitat license plates and how those dollars are spent in Minnesota. And announced today, right now, for the first time, we just got our spring schedule put up. So if you go visit our website, mndnr.gov/discover, you can register for all of our spring programs. So we look forward to that, starting out spring turkey hunting here in just a couple of weeks. So jump on there, register for that, and hope everybody has a safe and fun weekend in enjoying the beautiful weather. It's been a phenomenal winter, if you like warm weather, at least in Minnesota. So get out and enjoy it. And what does your friend say? Stay safe and don't die.
Yeah, happy
There,
snacking, don't die.
there you go. So use caution out there. Again, this is just a primer for getting out there foraging. It's a great way to get outside and enjoy a little bit of the outdoors and learn something new, but do it appropriately and do it with others and share your knowledge. So thanks, Tim, so much for joining us and sharing this. And thanks, everybody else. We'll see you next week, hopefully.